I'm Eric Gurr, and it's time to start another section of IT management. In this section, we're going to talk about managing goals. Now, as an IT manager, one of the things you've got to realize is your goals are not your team's goals, and your team's goals are not the individual's goals. This really comes into play, and we'll get into this later on, into managing remote people. So what I mean by this is you have goals as a manager, things you want to hit, and it might be your budget, hiring people, moving at times, security, other goals within your system. And then within your team, let's take developers. This could be 3 or 4 SQL guys or 6 or 7 developers. You're going to have to manage projects too. Now, not all the time. And we'll get into this in a later video too. There's a big difference between being a manager of people and project managers. You already know this, and developers definitely know it. But sometimes you have to, especially if you're in a smaller team, about 3 is my limit, maybe 4, where you can be an IT manager and manage a project as well. When you get 7 or 8, you should have a project manager. So now let's get into this managing the goals first, because it's really important, and this is when I've made this mistake more than a few times. So what you have to do is this project, let's say you're creating something to track e-commerce sales, and you're building an app to do this, and the app's going to be shared by a bunch of people, within the organization. So the end result is this app does X, and that's the team project goal. But what you have to remember here is that each member of the team has his own goal and his own piece of the pie to put together. So again, this is especially difficult. It's a skill you have to learn when you're managing remotely. I see this a lot is when you're doing your teams meeting, don't get the whole team together all the time. You have to make time to talk to each individual member of your team and find out where they are on their goals with this project. If you do that, it's your job that you'll take stress off of them and they'll be more efficient. If you do this, then after you've taken that stress off of them and you see where they are in their goals, you're going to become a better manager overall, not just on the project itself, but even managing the project managers, because you understand where each person is with themselves and in relation to the project. It's your job as the manager, and sometimes as the project manager, to put the whole thing together. But really, when you have a competent project manager, they'll do this. They'll drive down to the level of each person, see where their goal is. But even some project managers, some scrum masters that are really into the methodology will get kind of lost in this. And you really can't do that. You have to make time for each one of your employees, see where they are, and then help them reach their goals. And then when the team gets back together, even if a guy's behind a little, you already know this, you've already talked to him, and it doesn't create this friction. We talked about this in video 1. You don't want contention in your organization among your team players, but you also don't want it between yourself and a team player. And if possible, try to avoid even the appearance of this contention or friction. Yeah, Jim's a little bit behind, Mary's a little bit ahead, but there are circumstances that cause this. We know what they are, and it's all coming together at the end. That's your job as a manager. The project manager's job is to report to you where they are in the project, set timelines, things of that nature. A really good manager can wrap all of that and get his arms around all of it. Once you wrap all of that up, it becomes really easy to manage, even remotely, if you realize everybody's going along in a different way and you have to still make time to get to each one of those and manage those goals. Now, next we're going to get into how to get those goals broken down. Okay, breaking down goals is not the same as the project management. The project manager does set milestones, but your job is to more set the goals and break down the project into littler pieces. Some people call it eating the elephant one bite at a time. So you work with the project manager here, say, okay, this is kind of the path I see this take, and it's, you want to set these reasonable, but there's no way I can tell you set each goal to 1 week or 2 weeks. It depends on the project and then on what each individual person is doing in that project. The spaghetti on the wall project managers just throw everything up on the wall and say, okay, you have 2 weeks for this, 2 weeks for this, 2 weeks for this, 2 weeks for this. And if you're in a bigger, a little bit more sophisticated company, maybe somebody with a better budget, you think, oh, we would never do that. You'd be surprised how often that happens. Again, especially with newer project managers or project managers a little bit too in tune to the methodology and not the goal of the project itself. So it's your job to work with them, or again, if you're stuck doing the project management yourself, to break this down. And this is why it takes so much time a lot of times to get projects off the ground properly. But if you take that time and break this up reasonably at first, it becomes much easier then with the project plans to set these milestones. And you've got these projects that each individual knows, okay, I have this much time to work on this. You're always going to have cross communication between your different developers as you're figuring out what you need from each other. But if you can break that down, generally, I like to do it in about a week crunches. And these are not sprints, because the sprint is a specific set period of time. This has a little bit more flexibility in it. This is defining what the end result is. If you attach this to your sprint, what will happen is that the sprint ends on Friday at 2, and your developer is going to run out and write a bunch of code that's maybe not that great. Again, I get it. If some of you are in a little bit more mature, a little bit more sophisticated environments, you don't see these kind of things. But in small environments, it happens every single day. Why didn't you hit your target? Why didn't you hit your target? Why didn't you hit your goal? That wasn't a goal. That was a time milestone when we hit this, but it's moved. And the worst thing you can do, I've seen this before too, and I know there's developers out there, I've talked to them, oh, well, let's put it back in the backlog. You don't want to do that. Keep your goal reasonable and use your brain, use your mind to look at the thing and say, okay, we're not going to put this back in the backlog. He's been working on it for 2 weeks. We're probably a day or two away. So let's keep going on it and see what's going on with this one individual. Was he off sick for a couple of days? Did something happen? And then work to keep the goals smallish and then moving along at a reasonable pace with each other. One of the other great things I've discovered here over the years is if you leave a little bit of a gap between your sprints, or even if you're doing just Kanban boards, a lot of people just do Kanban boards, and this is done, and it's kind of a hybrid waterfall agile method. There's nothing wrong with that either. Keeping those goals broken down and static, meaning that don't change the goals on people all the time. Let's get to this point. If you do that, and let's say you've broken down your project into 20 milestones, and within those 20 milestones, you might have only 5 or 6 goals, or you might have 40 or 50 goals. But if you can get each person to set up their own goals for this, work with each developer individually, again, it takes time, I get it, but we want to make good code, efficient code, stable code, and reliable code. This is the best approach to do that, is working with each individual's goals broken down and then reassembled by you as the manager and sometimes by the project manager. Before we put it back in the backlog, let's see where everybody is, how it all fits together. Keep the goals small, keep on top of people. You don't let them go entirely, but don't browbeat them. Just work your way through it calmly. And then after you've done this 2 or 3 times, you kind of get a sense, not just for setting the goals within the project, but setting goals specific to your team. That's what makes a great manager, when you can delegate that authority and that those little projects and little goals to the right person at the right time. And this will happen quicker than you think. It's really productive. Okay, another thing from personal experience, something I've really screwed up at one time in particular in the past, but I did it a couple times. When you miss an important goal, do not fly off the handle. If you're a seasoned manager and you've done this well and you're just watching these videos, pick up some tips. You already know this. If you've been a manager for a year or so and you find yourself getting harried a little bit, especially when goals are missed and really critical goals, and you fly off the handle and start yelling at people, you got to reel that in right now. I was creating an ERP package once, custom ERP for a manufacturing company. Now, this is aerospace. It was serious development, but we were trying to integrate it into Microsoft Dynamics. And so we were doing the routing and the bill of materials, all the other things building up to it. And then when it was done, throw the financial data into Microsoft Dynamics. And my team was struggling with the APIs. And so I got really frustrated and I stormed out. I said, you guys got to get this moving, blah, 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 blah. Yelling at everybody, just angry. And that weekend I worked about 30 hours. And I think it was done in VB or C#.net. This is 10 years ago, I can't remember. But I worked all weekend, 30 hours, to learn how to use these specific APIs we wanted to put this information into Dynamics. And that was a mistake there. But then I came in Monday morning, kind of like I was on some great horse, and I fixed all this. I don't need you guys to help me with this. And it was just a disaster. And I realized it pretty quickly because everybody stopped working. They thought, well, if he says he can do it, the hell with him, let him do it. And that was probably the right thing for them to do. And a couple of days later, I realized, well, that was a huge mistake. So if you miss your goals, it's a time to learn a little bit of crisis management and also go back to your risk mitigation. If you had a good project plan from the start and a good overview wrapper, sometimes we use these terms, project plan and this and the other. What it really is about is getting your arms around the project itself and then getting yourself an own little narrative plan of how this is going to work. This is not something the project manager sees, or maybe even the team, but then early on, figure out what you're going to do when you miss deadlines, because it's going to happen. If you fly off the handle, all you're going to do is make this worse. The best thing to do if you're about to fly off the handle is calm yourself and say, guys, this is a big issue. Maybe let me look at this for a little bit. We need to think about this. Let's circle back tomorrow and talk about this. And then really spend some time looking at what went wrong, if you can, and you're going to have to get yourself back on track. So come up with a couple of things that you think will help you get back on track. It's rough, but sometimes you might have to take another programmer or two and put 3 guys on a thing that 1 or 2 were working on, just to get it back on track. Be honest and open about it. So this isn't a shot at anybody. Try to take the mistake yourself for the first time, especially if you've not had issues with this person before, the 1 or 2 guys on this project. If your project manager, she's getting upset, or if the developers, she's getting upset at the project manager, it's not going to do anybody any good. Slow it down, take some time. It's like when you're golfing and you hit the ball into the trees. Hit it back to the fairway. Don't go for the pin. You're just going to hit a tree, bounce back. It's the exact same thing. It's a perfect metaphor. It's get your project back out onto the fairway there and get moving in the right direction. If you do that day you lost it, you're going to stress so much over maybe a week you lost on a big project. If you try to just force fit everything and make it work, you're going to end up with crappy code or a crappy implementation or infrastructure on the cloud that doesn't work. You'll pay for that if you don't do it well and if you panic. I always go back to stay calm. And later on, when we get into what it takes to be a director and C-level, you'll see that one of the most important things a CIO does and is paid for, and I'm going to come back to this time and time again, when the building's on fire during an earthquake and a tornado hits, a good CEO, when all the managers come in, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? The good CEO says, I always knew this was going to happen. Look, guys, this is no different than one disaster. It's just 3 hit at the same time. It's actually less of a big deal. That may be complete bullplop, but it doesn't matter. Everybody thinks he's in charge. He's shouldering stress. When he closes the door, then he can freak out. When you close the door after you've missed the goal, then you can freak out. Don't do it in front of your people. Act like you know what you're doing. Stay in control. And then that day, or even if it's just a few hours that you buy yourself, the solution will often reveal itself.